All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at one of the absolute most famous events in history, the cross. But we're going to look at it a bit like an iceberg. You know how with an iceberg, the part you see sticking up above the water is really just a tiny sliver of the whole thing? The biggest, heaviest, and honestly, most dangerous part is completely hidden down underneath the waves. Well, the sources we're looking at today suggest the exact same thing is true about what Jesus experienced. There's just a whole lot more happening beneath the surface than what meets the eye. So it brings up a huge question. Was the cross just about physical pain? When most of us think about this famous story, we immediately picture the physical hurting, right? And sure, that physical reality was absolutely terrible. But our source text challenges us right out of the gate to ask if that physical suffering was the only thing happening. It turns out, if we're only looking at the physical side of things, we're actually missing the biggest, most important part of the whole story. Section 1. The surface. A very big mistake. You see, it's incredibly easy to just look at the surface of the story and think, oh, we've got it all figured out. But the text points out 3 really common mistakes people make here. First off, thinking he only felt a little tiny bit of the penalty for doing wrong. Second, believing that through all that pain, he still felt God's comforting love and acceptance the whole entire time. And third, imagining that he saw this bright, hopeful future, like the tomb was just completely illuminated with hope. The text tells us that assuming Jesus had that comforting evidence of his Father's love during this time is actually totally incorrect. Having these limited views completely hides the true bravery of what was really going on. To really get what was happening, we have to understand the word anguish. Anguish basically means severe mental or emotional pain and suffering. The source argues that his absolutely worst pain wasn't physical at all. It was a deep, deep sense of his Father's displeasure. Imagine the absolute worst mental ache or sadness you can possibly think of. Well, the text says his mental agony was so intense that we as human beings can only have a faint conception of it. It was this deep, crushing emotional suffering that went way, way beyond anything physical. Section 2. More than physical pain. To help us grasp this deeper pain, the author asks us to compare Jesus' experience with martyrs. Now, martyrs are those incredibly brave people throughout history who gave up their lives for their beliefs, sometimes even going through slow tortures or crucifixion themselves. If Jesus only suffered physical pain, the text argues, his death really wasn't any more painful than theirs. But the source shows Jesus suffered that physical pain plus something else entirely, something that literally crushed his spirit. That bodily pain, it was just a tiny, tiny fraction of his true agony. Section 3. The invisible heavyweight. Okay, remember our iceberg? Well, here is that massive hidden block of ice beneath the surface. First, the source says he was carrying the sins of the whole world. Think of the absolute heaviest backpack you have ever lifted, and then imagine it completely stuffed with the mistakes and guilt of literally every single person on earth. He was feeling all of it. Second, he felt the actual harsh penalty of a broken law. And third, and honestly this is probably the most terrifying part, he realized the complete separation that sin causes between God and man. He was experiencing exactly what it's like to be totally cut off and separated from a loving Father. That innocent man felt the full, crushing force of that massive divide. Section 4. In the darkest hour. The text describes him as being literally oppressed by the powers of darkness. The physical pain was bad, sure, but the unseen environment around him was just spiritually terrifying. It paints this truly frightening scene, saying he had not even one single ray of light to brighten the future. He felt like his Father was hiding from him, and instead, he was completely surrounded by evil angels. Just imagine being in total pitch darkness, feeling the crushing weight of that heavy backpack of the world's mistakes with absolutely zero comforting light shining ahead. It was in this exact, terrible hour of darkness that these really famous words were just wrenched from his lips. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? You see, this wasn't just a cry of physical pain. The text explains that this was the agonizing realization that he was entirely forsaken and completely alone. He felt like his Father's face was completely hidden from him, experiencing the ultimate separation right at the very bottom of that unseen iceberg. Section 5. The ultimate price. So why in the world would anyone willingly go through that kind of total isolation and mental agony? Well, the source gives a very clear answer. He did it all for you. Out of this profound, completely unmatched love, he carried the world's weight to secure an incredible prize for us. The text calls it the enterprise of everlasting life.
You can kind of think of it as the ultimate rescue mission to make sure that terrifying separation between God and man could be fixed forever. He wanted to bridge that massive gap so that no one else would ever have to carry that heavy backpack alone.
Which brings us to this final question. Since he gave absolutely everything for our everlasting life, shouldn't that be the most important thing we seek? Our source text ends with an incredibly powerful thought. It says that when you compare everything else in life to this ultimate rescue mission, everything else simply sinks into insignificance. When you realize the immense, invisible weight Jesus carried simply out of love, suddenly the other things we tend to worry about seem pretty small, don't they? Think about that the next time you picture this event. It wasn't just physical. It was an invisible rescue mission driven by the greatest love imaginable. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep asking the big questions.